Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Mitchell McGonigal, and thank you so much for joining us for our Week 4 Silver CY Cracker Barrel. It's a pleasure to have you all with us. Each week, we'll be covering a different topic on our Leadership Cracker Barrel, and this week, we'll be talking about transactional leadership. Keep in mind that there will be a live Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please use the Q&A feature below to have your questions answered at the end of the webinar. We're going to get things started with introductions. My name is Mitchell McGonigal. I'm the Metaspo Camp Director here at Yawgoo Scout Reservation. I have also served as a Program Commissioner and the Yawgoo Leadership Experience Director in the past 2 years. I'm an Eagle Scout out of Troop 1 Bellingham, where I also served as an Assistant Senior Patrol Leader and a Senior Patrol Leader. Leadership is something I'm very passionate about, and I very much enjoy our conversations that we have here on our Tuesday night Leadership Cracker Barrel. I'd like to pass things over to Matt.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Delva. So I'm the Assistant Medicine Bow Camp Director, and I was part of Troop 1 Arnold Mills, and I'm an Eagle Scout out of there. Prior to becoming Assistant Camp Director, I worked previously as a Program Commissioner and then also in the barn.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan DeLulio. I am the Food Services Director here at Yawgoo Scout Reservation. I have held this position. It'll be my 4th year now, and this is my 9th year on staff. In that time, I was on the Sandy Beach Management Team in 2014 through 2016, serving as the Services Director, Kitchen Manager, and Cook and Baker in the beach. And since then, I've been the Food Services Director. My leadership abilities and experience has started way back when I was in middle school and in high school. I used to go on leadership conferences to Boston and down in DC a couple times. And I served as my high school tennis team's captain my senior year. And since then, I've helped lead mission trips to Honduras several years. So a lot of different things going around, and I'm excited to talk about transactional leadership today.
Hi, my name is Ethan Bashan. I am the Yawgoo Leadership Experience Director here at Yawgoo Scout Reservation. Prior to that, I worked as a Program Commissioner, as well as working at the Craft Center. I was a member of Troop 65 Trumbull, Connecticut, where I served as the Senior Patrol Leader, as well as the Assistant Senior Patrol Leader on a few occasions.
Very good. So now that you've met our panel, we're going to jump right into our transactional leadership. Let's see, I apologize. So for an overview, some of the characteristics of transactional leadership is very much action and reaction. If you do something, you'll get something for it. It's very focused on short-term goals. So it's very focused on being efficient and quick, and it works very well when you have a lot of structure in your troop or organization. It's something that when there's a lot of creativity involved or change, it tends to be not as effective. So we're going to talk a little bit about some pros, some cons, as well as some examples and when this is a great leadership style to use. So I'd like to pass things over to Matt Delva to talk about some examples of this leadership style.
Thank you, Mitch. So just covering a little bit of the different examples. So a lot of mine are just going to be primarily like sports examples. That's just the easiest for me to relate it to. But there are definitely many other examples as well, but definitely sports in the business industry. So first off, one example would be with Vince Lombardi. And so Vince Lombardi was the coach for the Green Bay Packers. And so he signed a contract back in 1959. And under his leadership, the team was very successful. They actually never had a losing season. And actually over the course of his career, he led the team to many different winning records. And he led them to 5 championships. And of those 5, 2 of them were Super Bowls, which the trophy is named after him. But more than just his accomplishments, a big part of leading the Green Bay Packers organization, he would run the team actually through the same plays over and over and over again in practice. And although teams knew exactly what plays the Green Bay Packers would be running, the opposition actually never really was great at defending the team because they just became so great at running those plays. So that was that really helped in terms of the players playing well. They ended up receiving more money and being paid better for their better performances. But someone else who also contributes to the transactional leadership style is actually Bill Gates. And so Bill Gates, for those of you who might have joined us in previous weeks, you might have heard him also being referred to as an authoritarian leader. And so something that we usually cover in all the different Silver CY Cracker Barrels is just that we really want to develop a toolbox of leadership skills for all the scouts and scouters that are coming through, and really just knowing that not one leadership style is going to necessarily be used on every single occasion. Each leadership style has a certain different pros and cons, which Ethan and John will cover a little bit later. But just in some cases, it is very possible for someone who might be a specific type of leader to really just go back into that toolbox and shift to another style. But with Bill Gates, he was born out in Seattle back in 1955. And when he was actually starting Microsoft, by the time he was 23, Microsoft had actually grossed $2.5 million. But in 1985, the company launched their Windows program. And so right now, as many of you know, Bill Gates is one of the richest people in the world. And actually, as a transactional leader, he used to visit his new product teams, and he would ask them all very difficult questions until he was satisfied that the teams were on track and really understood their goals. And so this is really just, again, just making sure that they all knew exactly what they needed to do. They were better prepared in the long run. And that was really what the transaction was Gates was, he was asking a lot from them, but he was also receiving a lot from them in the end. Another example, I kind of touched upon this a little bit earlier in terms of some of the sports comparisons, is really just incentivizing with a lot of different like player contracts. So a lot of times now players can have within their contract, they might have guaranteed money or anything like that. But they can also have check marks and incentives that are based off of different performances that they might reach within their contract. And so for those of you who might be from the New England area or might follow the New England Patriots organization, they recently signed quarterback Cam Newton. And although his contract might have a base salary of around $1 million, it's been reported that with incentives, by maybe throwing a certain amount of touchdowns, playing a certain amount of games, things of that nature, the contract actually has the potential to yield more money. So it's upwards of about $7 to $8 million. And so really just that's just another example of transactions in everyday leadership. But now I'm just going to pass you over to John, who's going to cover a little bit of the pros.
Thank you, Matt. As he talked about, we really want to expand our leadership toolbox. So some of the pros I want to talk about, and I'll give a specific example of how we can do that here even at camp. But one of those examples is it rewards those who are motivated by self-interest to follow instructions. So those people that are good at following instructions and are motivated just by their personal goals, this is kind of a leadership style that's for that. But it does provide an unambiguous structure for large organizations. So large organizations are very hard to lead. It takes multiple people to fill those roles. It can't just be one person. That's why organizations have boards. That's why they have committees and lots of other groupings to fulfill the goals of the company. But some systems require repetitive tasks and an infinitely reproducible environments. So sometimes there's lots of these goals that companies are trying to do that need to be repeated on a daily basis, on a weekly, monthly basis. And that's really hard to motivate. But in short-term goals, it's really easy to motivate people to do this. So one example I have at camp is when I was services director. Every year we have to paint fire buckets. That's one of the great things you'll get to see in campsites. On every tent platform, there's a couple of them there around the fire pit, and they're always new and fresh. Unfortunately, my year as services director, I was slacking a little bit, and I'd pushed it off. I wasn't trying to have my staff paint fire buckets because it's always hot, it's always rainy. I could come up with a lot of different excuses, but I knew it had to get done, and trying to figure out a way to do that, I thought of what's a better way if you're painting fire buckets out in the hot sun than if you have a soda right after you're done. So I bought a case of Yacht Club and said, after you paint so many fire buckets, you'll get a soda. So we were able to paint all of the fire buckets in all of Sandy Beach in 2014 in just 1 week and replace them all. So that was a short-term goal that I was able to incentivize with just soda. While it's a simple example, it's possible to replicate this on a bigger scale, probably not with soda, but definitely it's possible to replicate this for shorter term goals. The last thing I want to touch upon is that rewards and penalties are clearly defined for workers or whoever is following. So things are laid out in such a way that where workers know what's going to happen if they achieve these goals, such as a positive thing like a bottle of soda, or if they don't achieve their goals. So this is very much a good way for workers to know boundaries and rules and what will happen either way if they finish the job or if they don't finish the job. So I'm going to pass this over to Ethan, who's going to discuss more of the cons.
Thank you, John. So there are a couple of cons that come along with this type of leadership. One of which is that it relies on the participants or those who are being led to buy into the prize at the end of the tunnel. So it depends on what you're offering or what the reward is for the scouts that are following your leadership. If they don't like what you're offering or they don't personally invest themselves into getting that reward, they're less likely or just won't at all follow your instruction. One of which is another good camp example. When I was an SPL of my troop, we were trying to get done the morning chores. There were a couple scouts still sitting around the campsite, and I was trying to encourage them to finish their work. And I encouraged them by saying, we can go kayaking afterwards, which would seem like a lot of fun and should get a lot of scouts excited. However, the scouts that were still around the site preferred to stay in the site and didn't want to actually go and do activities. So when I was offering an activity as a reward for completing a task that needed to be done, they didn't want that reward. Therefore, it took longer for the task to actually be accomplished. So it always depends on what you're actually offering them to make them want to actually perform the task. And it also makes cooperation harder in the future if they decide that there's no more rewards coming. You can't possibly always be offering them something, or else they think that, or scouts can think that they can get whatever they want out of you as a leader. So if you eventually decide, I don't have anything more to give, I don't have any more rewards, we just need to do the task for the sake of doing the task, you're going to have some scouts that had previously thought that every time they completed a task, they will get a reward. But now that that has changed, they might not listen to you anymore, and they may wait again until you offer a reward. So having that ingrained in their heads that every time I do something, I'll receive something, will put them in a position later on where they can refuse to work due to the fact that they're not being offered anything. And going along with that, it makes it harder to transition to different types of leadership. Since they are expecting a reward, they won't listen to you if you're trying to just be optimistic, or you're trying to be a charismatic leader that's leading them past a simple objective, simply because you're the SPL that always gives out candy once you clean the latrine. And once you're known as the SPL that always gives out candy when you clean the latrine, you're expected to always give out the candy. And once you stop giving out the candy, you lose the authority that you've established. And at the same time, it limits the scouts that you're instructing's creativity. You're setting a goal, which is good. You always want to set a goal. You always want to accomplish something. However, when you set it from only point A to point B with no larger goal in mind, it becomes harder for scouts to become emotionally invested into the activity or the task that they're doing, or missing the big picture. And when scouts do not see the big picture, especially at a younger age, they don't put their best effort into it, or they're not interested in doing it at all. With transactional leadership, that becomes very hard to set a long-term goal and continue to produce results. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to Matt for when to use this style.
Thank you, Ethan. So with transactional leadership, it really works well in organizations where the structure is important. But transactional leadership might not be the best fit when organizations require a lot of initiative. And that's usually just because within like those initiative-based organizations, self-starters don't really need incentives, or so it's very easy for them to just be able to go and do the task and not require some kind of reward or prize or something at the end of the tunnel. But Ethan did draw up on a good point when he just spoke about, so a great time that you can use transactional leadership is when you might be working with younger scouts who might be new to your troop, or possibly even some of the older scouts who might be a little bit closer to aging out, especially if you're like an SPL who's kind of like in the middle of the troop as far as age goes. Sometimes those older scouts might be a little bit uncooperative, might be a little bit harder to work with. But so you can use the transactional leadership to kind of get results, but you definitely want to be careful, because you can kind of almost create like this dependency on like people aren't going to do any tasks unless they know that there's going to be some kind of incentive. And you also come to a point where if you give out incentives to for almost everything, there has to be like follow through. So if you don't give out incentives at a certain point, but you promise those incentives, people are going to start thinking that you're not going to be true to your word, and they're not going to do the task because they don't think they'll get whatever you promised them at the end. But now just to recap, I'll pass you all over back to Mitchell.
All right, thank you, Matt. And I think a lot of what Matt said is a lot of a recap, where transactional leaders monitor followers carefully to enforce the rules. In times of success, they reward you, and you fail, you get punished for it as well. As John pointed out, there is a very clear expectation of what, if you do something right and well, you're going to get rewarded for it. There are consequences when things don't go according to plan. In times of crisis, transactional leaders can help maintain that status quo and keep the ship afloat, so to speak. It's very useful in certain situations, but it can be also considered insufficient in many cases and may prevent both leaders and followers from achieving their full potential. And I think to really sum this up is, I think as leaders, we really want to inspire people. And it's really hard to inspire people when everything you get is this like intrinsic, like this money, this reward, this candy, something like that. It's very, there's only so far that can get you when it comes to developing leadership in your troop, and really personally as well. Finding a passion for something that you're interested in and finding like a real purpose behind it, I feel like is a much more powerful motivator than say like the candy or money or whatever else that transactional leadership really provides. That being said, it's definitely a useful leadership style to know, and that's why we covered it for today. We had some great examples of why and when this is a great style to use, and then also some examples of when this leadership style should not be used. So that is going to be our transactional leadership talk. At this time, I'd like to open things up to our question and answer segment. If we have any other questions and answers, please be sure to drop them in the box below. We are going to get started off with what is a better type of leader, an authoritarian leader or a transactional leader? Ethan, would you like to chime in on this one?
Sure. I think that there's two possible answers to this one, and you have to think about it in the short term and the long term. In the short term, I would definitely assess a transactional leader to be the better choice, simply because if there's, say, one or two tasks that you need to get done and you have the resources to provide a reward for those one or two tasks being done, it's definitely a good idea to be a transactional leader in that case, especially as Matt was mentioning earlier, if there are scouts that are a little harder to motivate. However, in the long term, and it's not particularly because of the leadership style itself, an authoritarian leader might be the better option due to the fact that an authoritarian leader, even though he's not, or he or she is not expressing it in the proper means, they understand a wider variety of leadership skills and can transition that to a better form of leadership. Whereas, as I was mentioning earlier, with a transactional leader, they have established a reputation for themselves to be based solely off of rewards and compensation for a scout completing an activity or a task. So it's a lot harder in the long term for a transactional leader to become a charismatic leader or a transformational leader, whereas an authoritarian leader will be more welcomed as a transformational or charismatic leader without any further expectations going on.
Very good. John or Matt, would you like to chime in on that?
Yeah, so I agree with what Ethan just said. to an extent. There was just one thing that I think that could be added is that just in some cases in the short term, like let's say like an emergency, that would be a case where like authoritarian leadership would just be would definitely kind of like overrule like transactional like leadership. So like in the case that like someone needed like medical attention, obviously in like that case, I would just kind of like tell someone, hey, like you specifically need to call like 911 rather than saying, hey, if you call 911, I'll give you like an ice cream or something. There's just like, and obviously Ethan knows that, like it's just that in the short term though, I definitely can agree that transactional leadership has its benefits over authoritarian leadership at times.
Very good, John.
Yeah, I think they both really touched upon it, but it's about us providing you different types of leadership, and over the next couple of weeks, hopefully we'll show you a couple others, and you'll be able to understand the difference between more leadership styles, and that'll help you make the decision of when to be a transactional leader, when to be an authoritarian leader, and which style is right for which situation.
Absolutely. And I think you all made some excellent points. As I've mentioned before, and Matt just mentioned this evening, is that you want to have this developed toolbox of leadership skills that you can apply in different situations depending on that situation. There might be situations where an authoritarian leader is a better leader for that situation in that group, which can also be true with transactional as well. Everyone responds to different types of leadership, and every situation requires a different type of leadership, and there might be combinations as well. So it's just having a better understanding of different styles, and that way you can mix and match and apply them in a situation that's going to be effective for you and for your group. So at this time, I believe that's going to wrap it up for us. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'd love to see you next week on the Tuesday SBL Cracker Barrel. Have a great evening and take care.